giant of limitless power at man's command. And where was it science found that giant? In the atom, a particle so infinitely small that it takes over 100 billion atoms to make up the head of a pin.
This is Out of the Basement, a podcast dedicated to radiation medicine.
This is Dr. Jason Bechter coming at you out of the green Vermont mountain basements, here to talk about the third rail of life in modern America, equity. And I'm only sort of kidding, but I specifically mean the health equity achievement in radiation therapy payments, or HART payments, that are in the proposed ROCR legislation. And I did not talk about this in the letter to the editor that was published in PRO recently because, one, when I wrote it in January, there wasn't much information available about HART, but two, I, despite what some people may think, try to not publicly express any opinions without having considered it. And I didn't really think much about these things because I felt like it was a minor part of it. And when I was going through again the legislation, putting together a companion guide that is not subject to word limitations, which, by the way, I thought was very interesting that I was forced to stick to the 400 word limit for the letter to the editor, and it did not escape my notice that the response to my response was 917 words, more than double. And this came up in the back and forth with myself and Dr. Yu, who was the first author and the associate editor of PRO, and it is because Dr. Amder decided to have Dr. Yu write his response as a editorial. So that was a classy move, guys. I'm just kidding, sort of. So the HART payment, for those who don't know, it is part of the ROCR bundle, and it is a $500 reimbursement to offset the cost of providing care for people with transportation issues, ostensibly. And in the original policy paper from 2023, the ROCR policy paper, they briefly touch on this in about a half a page, saying that delays in the time to treatment initiation are associated with absolute increased risk of mortality, ranging from 1.2 to 3.2% per week in Black, Hispanic, and Native American Medicare beneficiaries were less likely to initiate radiation treatments. And interestingly, and very close to home, they talk about people residing in isolated rural census tracts account for approximately 9.4 million people in the U.S. and had a nearly 1 hour longer travel time to an RO provider than people in urban tracts. And that's me. So as I am often fond of saying, I practice exclusively in Rutland, Vermont, which is the second biggest city in Vermont. And I laugh every time I say that. So Vermont has 649,000 people total. And Rutland, the Rutland area is allegedly like 50,000 people. And I struggle to believe that. The Rutland proper, quote unquote, is, I'd have to look at Wikipedia. I haven't looked at it a bit, but it's between 10 and 15,000 people. We're small. And I am the only linear accelerator for about an hour in any direction, with Dartmouth in Lebanon, New Hampshire being probably the closest. By the way I drive, it's about 55 minutes. Except you got to go over Killington, which is not a thing that you can sometimes do depending on what the weather is doing. So this is something near and dear to my heart, because on any given day, I would guess at least 50%, I would argue probably more than 50% of my patients have to drive 45 minutes each way. So I one day I'm going to sit down and calculate this out. I would say almost 80% of any given day, people are driving at least 20 to 30 minutes to get to me one way. It's very uncommon for people to have less than a 20 to 30 minute drive. Very frequently, I have people with 45 minutes to an hour, to sometimes more than an hour, one way. And I always ask, are you sure I am the closest? Because I would rather you not have to do that. And nope, that has already been figured out by whoever sent them to me, if they're coming from like Dartmouth or Burlington or somewhere else, because that's how it goes here. So this is a thing I deal with quite frequently, and we all have. This has always been an issue, no matter where I was, if I was in an actual city or here in the verdant mountains of Vermont. So reading through this again, the justification in the policy paper or I guess the kind of explanation, is that the HART payment of $500 per patient per episode would support transportation to radiation oncology treatment services for beneficiaries who are at risk because of transportation barriers. And they write that beneficiary transportation need will be determined by the following transportation screening question from the Accountable Health Community's Health-Related Social Needs Screening Tool. Here's the question. In the past 2 months, has a lack of reliable transportation kept you from medical appointments, meetings, work, or from getting things needed for daily living? And if the patient answers in the affirmative, there will be a Z code, a ZICD-10 code that will be dropped in the chart, and it will trigger this. So why in the world would I be making a podcast about such a lovely initiative? And sometimes I'll just be straight up positive. I'm going to really throw people off and just do this long investigative journalism type episode with just something I really like one day. But when I got my hands on the text and I was just reading this and really just kind of mulling this over in my head for a while now since reading this, and the eligibility in the actual body of the legislation, of the proposed legislation. So the determination of reporting code, it reads, the radiation therapy provider or radiation therapy supplier shall follow the following procedures to determine if the ICD-10 diagnosis code Z59.82 transportation insecurity needs to be reported. And so then they repeat what I just read about the past 2 months, any sort of barriers. And if the answer is yes, you drop the Z59.82 code. And again, in the amount in the legislation, it reads, for services furnished during the year following the date the regulations issued pursuant to subsection A1 become effective, $500 per patient per episode of care, and for services furnished in subsequent years, the amount determined under this paragraph for the preceding year increased by $10, which is somewhat confusing. I guess there's a $10 per year inflation rate adjustment is what I'm reading. Someone correct me on that, but it sounds like, so year 1 would be 500, year 2 would be 510, year 3 would be 520. Should be quite interesting if you extrapolate that out, where over time it would increase. Probably not faster than inflation, of course, but the part that really caught my eye was the next part. So this is part 4 of this subsection. Payment recipient. The health equity achievement in radiation therapy add-on payment shall be paid to the radiation therapy provider or radiation therapy supplier that provides the technical component of the radiation therapy service. So for most of us are W-2 employees of some hospital or hospital system. So that means the $500 is not going to the patient, and that means the $500 is not going to us or to anything else other than the great big black box that is hospital reimbursement. So this is functionally just a bonus payment of $500. And then even more interestingly, the next section, section 5, not to be used in addition to or in lieu of other services. The health equity achievement in radiation therapy add-on payment shall not be made in addition to or in lieu of any other state or federal program benefits that may be used for transportation services, which, in my opinion, is setting us up for the greatest Ketam whistleblower cases America has ever seen. Okay, maybe not. Let me ask you a question. Actually, let me just describe how I do this. So when I have one of my patients who I talk to about, is it going to be a problem to get here for however long we're going to do it, or they volunteer that they're concerned about that, I have them talk with our social worker. And Vermont, out of all the places I practice, actually Vermont does an amazing job of transport. It's the least painful it's been compared to New York and Connecticut and Virginia and stuff. But part of that might be my social worker is amazing. But Vermont has some fairly robust transportation. And there are many mechanisms. There's many levers by which that happens. So usually social work and the other support staff will help the patient arrange this. I am totally left out of it. So in this ROCR scenario, I would go, if a patient had transportation issues, I would drop this Z code and go about my day. Well, the problem being, what if my social worker sets the patient up with Medicare rides or Medicaid, so we have a Medicaid bus? Or what if there's any other of the ride options get some form of federal funding? Well, we would be in direct violation of law, I guess, because again, if this passes, this would be a law. So I would be breaking the law if I dropped the Z59.82 code and then the team arranged rides for a patient and those rides were somehow reimbursed by some form of state or federal program. I would have no idea. And that is a slam dunk whistleblower case for whoever wanted to do that. So this creates quite the conundrum for me, because then I would be very reluctant to use this code, seeing this regulation or seeing the language in this, because I generally, this might be a surprise, I generally don't like breaking the law. It's like not a thing I generally try to do. And I especially hate accidentally breaking the law. Oh, it's the worst. And because that's what this is. So CMS, when CMS does something, it's a regulation. And so whistleblower cases are often when you're in violation of regulations. As a nuanced point, but this would literally be breaking the law. And I would like an explanation to how we are going to reconcile this. But the bigger one beyond that is, you're telling me that this is just going to go right to the hospital. So how is this going to work? So you're ostensibly saying this heart payment is to reduce disparities. And you say that you recognize that there is a good percentage of Americans, millions of Americans, that have issues, transportation insecurities. And your solution to that is to provide an additional $500 to reduce those disparities. Well, to me, my assumption would be that $500 would go to the patient, or the $500 would be mandated to go to some sort of program or some sort of, there would have to be stipulations to it. If you make it so it's just a flat payment to the hospital, how in the world is that reducing disparities? That doesn't make any sense. So the rich get richer, as it were, where the hospital is just going to pocket this. Do you think the hospital is going to go out of its way and make sure that this goes into their transportation program? How many hospitals actually have a transportation program that they themselves fund? So, there's volunteer programs, there's areas or hospitals I've been where there's some level of this, but, I know practices out there. There's a large practice in Arkansas, which is great, that they've built up their own sort of ride program, at least the last time I talked to them about this. And it's amazing. That's a lovely thing. Part of the reason I remember this, even though this conversation took place several years ago, is how uncommon it is. And so the only way this makes sense in terms of actually reducing disparities would be if it just so happens that the hospital or the supplier who is getting this extra $500 is using or created a ride program, transportation program, and is using it to help people who would be disadvantaged into getting to treatments, get to treatments. And it does not appear that that's the case. This is not how this was written. So it's setting us up, the doctors up, for whistleblower cases, because at the end of the day, you're the one whose name is on the bill. So when a whistleblower case comes in, whose name is going to be first on the suit? It's going to be Dr. Becta. Right there. I'll be the named case in this, the named party in this. And I didn't even get anything out of it. So this is helping me not at all in terms of my personal compensation. But that's not what this is about, right? This is about reducing disparities. So how is this going to help the patient? How is this reducing disparities? Or is this just lip service? Because that's sure what it seems like. It seems like leveraging the buzzword of equity and diversity and disparities. So I guess buzzwords plural. And is simply serving to increase the revenue for a hospital or a large private practice like Genesis Care, and puts the doctor at risk for a key TAM case. And it's entirely unclear to me how the patient at the heart of this is actually getting any benefit at all. And this is yet another thing that if we had been allowed to have seen this legislation before it was submitted, somebody would have pointed this out, because this is just kind of obvious. And instead, here it is sitting in Congress, just blatantly flawed. And, I don't think there's any maliciousness here. I think this was a genuine attempt, knowing the people who seem to have pushed for this. I think this was a genuine sort of thing. I think others may have facilitated this because it does have good optics. But do think this came out of a place of goodness. And it just was not, it was probably done by people who are not familiar with how this works in terms of reimbursement. Like, it sounds great to say, oh, we'll do extra $500 if the patient meets this. Okay, well, if you just put if you took a $500 chunk of cash and put an Apple AirTag on it or whatever those things are, and you had to follow that $500 throughout this whole sort of deal. For those of us who do this, it's pretty clear where this is going to go and where it's not going to go. And it's unfortunate that there was not a chance for stakeholder feedback and a chance to address this, because this could have been good. But for now, it's a great way to get those hospitals that are really hurting for cash another $500 per patient. So I could be wrong. Maybe there is trickle-down equity economics. Maybe this will actually somehow benefit the patient. I just have lived in the real world for quite some time now and struggle to see that, but maybe I'm wrong. And if I'm reading this wrong, somebody, I would love to hear how I'm incorrect. I'd like to hear anything at all, because we haven't really heard much since they submitted this thing. But that was just my concerns that I could not get out of my head. So I'm going to force it into digital format and foist it upon the rest of you. And I hope everyone is staying safe in this interesting summer.
This has been a Photon Media production. Don't forget to like and subscribe on whatever platform you use to listen to us. Be well and beam on.